And then we also build up over time an expertise in the enactment of legislation, such that our Parliament can be fully active in this regard. I think there was a great deal of concern when the last Parliament convened that there were too many bills that were left unconsidered, and the government believed strongly that Parliament should at least look at them. If it didn't like them, then it could always return them, but to leave them unattended was something that raised a great deal of concern. So we are moving in the right direction. We're confident about that. I'm in constant touch with many of the think tanks, democracy think tanks that are vigilant in this area, and we have a very healthy discussion about these issues.
How do you evaluate China's efforts to play a growing political, diplomatic, and economic role in the Arab world?
You know, I wish I knew more about this. You know, it's a part of the world which has long excited interest by many a great power. China, of course, is a country with whom we do business. It's a country of growing stature in Asia, together with India. And in both respects, I think we have a very close and warm relationship with them. And we believe it's important that they engage. I was, a few years ago, just parenthetically, asked by the then Secretary General of the UN to travel to the Congo and undertake a study for the UN. And I traveled there and found, to my delight and astonishment, that there was a Chinese battalion in the middle of the Congo, and that they were doing exceedingly well. And so obviously China is more intent in engaging with the rest of the world, whether it be commercially or the involvement in humanitarian affairs. And I think that is largely to be welcomed.
You made reference in your remarks to the experience of breakthroughs in the Bosnian crisis. What lessons were learned? What mistakes were made that would be applicable to resolving the Arab-Israeli conflict from Jordan's perspective?
Well, the interesting thing about the Bosnia crisis is there was a gentleman by the name of Justice Goldstone who in April of 1995 announced that he was going to investigate Radovan Karadzic, Ratko Mladic, and a gentleman by the name of Stanisic. And immediately it threw the UN into a state of disarray, because the feeling was, you know, here we had the intrusion of a different sort of element. It was a justice element, and it threatened to derail whatever it is that we thought inescapably bound up with the possibility of peace. And that is, if you couldn't talk to these people because subsequently they were going to be indicted, how could you possibly arrive at a peace? But what Goldstone did is that by intruding into this, in effect, he forced us to change and adapt to his reality. And we had to do that. Of course, we couldn't escape the trauma and the disaster that was Srebrenica. Soon after that, though, everything began to change. And I think, likewise, broadly speaking, when you look at the International Criminal Court, it's created no shortage of discomfort in many capitals because it's presenting itself as a check on the latitude of behavior that previously was thought to be possible by certain peoples around the globe, and now I think is quickly being circumscribed by the court. In terms of the Middle East, again, it's the belief that there is nothing that is impossible where peace is concerned. If the desire is there and the exhaustion is plentiful and the goodwill is evident, then you hope that the combination of circumstance will bring us to this point. There is an element of fate or luck involved. I have often remarked that countries do not negotiate treaties. It is individuals who so happen to represent those countries. You could take 5 countries, put them around the table, or ask them to send their representatives and put them around the table, and ask them to negotiate a particular document. And you may well find that they can't agree on a single comma where it should be placed. You then change those 5 individuals, the same governments, change the individuals, and suddenly within 5 minutes everything has been negotiated and agreed to. So you need an element of luck, but there's so much individual sort of, so much of a role for the individual negotiator that if we have the sort of fortuitous combination of peoples, then I think we can do this quite quickly.
Would you comment on the status of the role of women from an education, economic, and political standpoint, both in your country of Jordan and in the entire Arab world?
Oh, dearie me.
I had to put that one in.
Well, you know, we like to take pride that on all indicators we have seen Jordan move forward. We have now a much greater awareness of the role of women, the role that women need to play. I think, like most societies, it is patently obvious that when you look at the secondary schools examination results, out of the top 20 students, the vast majority are women. And the same can be said of our scores at universities. The highest scoring and the most gifted students are women. But then that does not translate itself into having a large percentage of women in our workforce. And so we must better understand why this is the case, some of it's cultural, and ensure that we can overcome this. We must also, I think, do more, and Her Majesty Queen Rania has been exceptional in this area, do more to understand the pressures on women. We have now shelters for battered women, battered children. We have hotlines. We have means by which we can understand that problems are occurring. I think more and more people in Jordan understand that, yes, what exists in a family should lie in the family, but there are limits. If you are abusing your children, that the courts could themselves intervene. And I think all of this is good. But broadly speaking, if I can also make another point, I was chairing the Consultative Committee for UNIFEM, the UN Development Fund for Women, and I did this for 3 years. And it was very sad for me to notice that in many of the fora where we discuss these issues, whether it be the Commission on the Status of Women, which obviously deals with CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, you notice that by and large the delegates are women themselves. And really the target audience in any country are young men. And we need more young men to take up the cause of women. And also we need to ensure that gender equality is not something that is trumpeted just at the time of elections when those aspiring for office seek the women's vote and then will say all sorts of kind things, and then after the elections you see very little. So I think we need to better appreciate all of this. Finally, I should just say that a few months ago I met a very distinguished delegation from Argentina, women, lady senators, and we sat across the table, and a very impressive lady said to me, Mr. Ambassador, we come from a country that believes in gender equality. And this was her opening line. So I thought, my goodness, what does she think, what does she think, where does she think I come from? So I said, Madam Senator, I must respectfully disagree, because I come from a country that does not believe in gender equality. And so you could see the temperature in the room rising. Mm-hmm. And then I looked at her and I said, I firmly believe in the superiority of women. And and we had a very pleasant conversation after that.
Mr. Ambassador, this question is with regard to the joint economic zones between Jordan and Israel that came after the peace agreement between the two countries. I believe your predecessor, Ambassador Kuwar, was fully involved in those dynamics. Why does one not hear anything further about them? what are the successes, what are the shortcomings, and how have they been affected since the Israeli invasion of Gaza 14 months ago?
Yeah, and they're basically still very much operational. Perhaps because of that, they haven't made the news, but they have given us first-hand knowledge of how certain industries operate, which hitherto we were not exposed to. For instance, the apparel industry quickly set up investments in Jordan, and the QIZs were fully active. And we saw our exports jump from something which was really quite modest to something quite exceptional. But as you alluded in your comments, this was a new experience for us. And for instance, we were under the impression that the apparel industry would better monitor its own performances in respect of local laws where labor rights were concerned. And we realized this was not necessarily the case. We were rather naive in this, and that we needed to work with industry to ensure that labor laws were implemented. We also had to adapt our labor laws to take that into account. We like to think, although we were early on sort of censured by the National Labor Committee here, we like to think, though, that Jordan is a model for a country that has responded to these allegations. And we did so quite quickly. And we didn't try and sweep the allegation aside or deny it. We said we fully agree, we understand we have a problem. This is new to us, help us. And we reached out to the ILO, we reached out to friendly countries. And I think we've largely put our house in order. There's a golden list for factories, and now a large percentage of the factories in Jordan have subscribed to this, and this is all very good. And we will never remove all complaints, but I think the manner by which the Jordanian government deals with them is to be commended.
What was the reaction in Jordan after the Jordanian suicide bomber killed the CIA agents as well as a Jordanian agent a few months ago?
Yeah, you know, it's a very interesting question, this. Because if you talk to development specialists, they will say to us, you know, what we need to do to rein in extremist thinking is we need to give people an opportunity. We need to create jobs where they don't exist. We need to give people hope. And this is undeniably true. But as this particular case has shown, the bomber himself was a physician. He scored very highly on our secondary school's exams, the Tawjihi. He received a scholarship to continue his studies in medicine. He was married. He had 2 young girls. And so the material advantage had no bearing on his decisions to become affiliated to Al-Qaeda. And it raises the deeper question of why, you know, how can violence of the form that is used by any party, it doesn't have to come from the Middle East, it can come from any region, you know, why should it develop a currency? I you know, often think that we don't really understand ourselves the way that we think we understand ourselves. I think when you look at the 20th century, in one way it's done us a disservice, because it led us to think that we have concluded or we have answers to many of the vexing phenomena before us. And I would contend that many of the so-called conclusions are only conjecture. You know, I'll give you an example, for instance. Soon after the terrible, dramatic events of 9/11, there was much discussion as to why it happened and who these people were and why they did it. But there was something in my mind that's missing here. It occurred to me that the actions of 9/11 were a distant cousin to the shooting at the Columbine High School a couple of years earlier.